Dr. Elena Vasquez had been staring at computer screens for 3 years straight. Not the same screen, of course, but it felt that way. Day after day, week after week, month after month of empty space, just stars, planets, and the occasional asteroid, floating by like lonely rocks in an endless ocean. The research ship Endeavour was humanity's pride and joy. It had cost more money than most countries had ever seen, packed with the smartest people Earth could find, and sent out into the darkness. With one simple mission: find life, any kind of life. Even a tiny bacteria would have made the whole trip worth it. But 3 years is a long time to spend looking at nothing but empty space. Eleanor pressed her nose against the cold glass of the observation deck, watching another boring day turn into another boring night. The stars looked the same as they always did, pretty, but distant and cold. She was about to head back to her lab when something caught her eye, a shadow, moving against the STA or FIELD dot. At first, she thought it might be debris or maybe a small asteroid. But asteroids don't move in straight lines. They tumble and spin. This thing was moving with purpose, like it knew exactly where it was going. Her heart started beating faster. After 3 years of seeing nothing but rocks and gas clouds, anything different was exciting. She grabbed her communicator and called the bridge. "Captain, we've got something out here." Within minutes, the ship's alarms were blaring, not the emergency kind, but the alert that meant everyone needed to get to their stations right now. Eleanor ran through the corridors, her footsteps echoing off the metal walls. Other crew members were running too, all heading toward the observation areas. When she got back to the main viewing area, half the crew was already there, and they were all staring at the same thing that had caught her attention, except now. It was much closer. The alien ship was huge. Not just big, absolutely massive. If their ship was like a car, this thing was like a freight train. It had sharp edges and weird angles that made it look like it was built for one thing: fighting. Every line of the ship seemed designed to look scary, like a metal predator swimming through space. Admiral Chen was barking orders to his team. Battle stations, all defensive systems online, communications. Try to reach them, but keep our weapons ready. Elena could understand why everyone was nervous. The ship looked like something out of their worst nightmares about alien invasion. It was dark, angular, and moved through space like it owned the place. If you had to design a ship to scare people, this is exactly what you'd build. But something felt wrong about the whole situation. The communications officer was trying to talk to the aliens, but the universal translator was making everything sound terrible. Every message that came through sounded like growling and threats. "Surrender your vessel and prepare for domination," kept coming through the speakers. But Elena had studied languages her whole life. Not just human languages, but animal communication, mathematical patterns, even the way computers talk to each other. And there was something about these alien messages that didn't match the threatening words. Hidden in all the scary-sounding growls and demands, she could hear patterns. Mathematical sequences. Not random numbers, but organized, beautiful patterns. That reminded her of music. Her grandmother used to play classical music when Elena was little. And these number patterns had the same kind of structure. Complex, elegant, and definitely not random. "Admiral," she said, stepping forward. "I think there's been a mistake." Chen looked at her like she was crazy. "A mistake? Dr. Vasquez. That ship could blow us apart in seconds." Their first message was a demand for surrender. But look at the mathematics hidden in their transmission. Elena pulled up the data on her tablet. These aren't weapon coordinates or battle plans. They're like symphonies. Beautiful, complex mathematical symphonies. The bridge got quiet. Everyone was looking at her tablet, trying to understand what she was seeing. "I think the translator is getting it wrong," Elena continued. "What if they're not trying to threaten us? What if they're trying to say hello, and our machine is just making it sound scary?" It was a crazy idea. The ship looked like a weapon. The messages sounded like threats. Every logical part of their training said this was a dangerous first contact situation. But Elena had spent her whole career studying life. and she'd learned that life rarely works the way you expect it to. "Let me try something," she said. "Let me send them a mathematical greeting, something peaceful. If I'm wrong, we'll know pretty quickly." Admiral Chen looked around at his officers. They all looked as confused and scared as he felt, but they'd been out here for 3 years looking for exactly this moment. And Dr. Vasquez was the smartest person on the ship when it came to understanding alien life. "Do it," he said finally, "but keep our defenses ready." Elena worked quickly, creating a mathematical message that was clearly peaceful. She used prime numbers arranged in patterns that showed intelligence but no aggression. She added mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio, things that any advanced civilization would recognize as beautiful rather than threatening. She sent the message and waited. The response came back almost immediately, and when the computer translated it, everyone on the bridge stood in stunned silence. "We apologize for our frightening appearance. Do you require assistance with navigation or repairs? We mean no harm and welcome you to this region of space, the galaxy's most terrifying-looking aliens, it turned out. We're actually worried about scaring the humans." Elena smiled as she looked out at the massive alien ship. Sometimes the most important discoveries come not from what you expect to find, but from what you never expected at all. After 3 years of empty space, they finally found life, and it was nothing like what anyone had imagined. The real adventure was just beginning. Captain Zethkar couldn't stop pacing. His massive feet made loud clicking sounds on the metal floor of his ship's bridge, and his crew members kept glancing at him nervously. They'd seen their captain worried before, but never like this. The tiny human ship floating in front of them looked so fragile that Zethkar was afraid to move his own vessel too close. One wrong move, one engine burst that was too strong, and he might accidentally damage the delicate little craft. It would be like a giant trying to pet a butterfly. No matter how gentle you tried to be, you might still cause harm. Zethkar stood 8 feet tall, covered in natural armor that looked like polished black stone. His claws were sharp enough to cut through metal, and his teeth could bite through the toughest materials his home planet had to offer. To any other species in the galaxy, he looked like the perfect warrior, built for battle and conquest. But looks can be deceiving. The truth was, Zethkar had never wanted to hurt anyone in his entire life. None of his people did. They looked scary because they had to. Their home planet, Vraxis, was the most dangerous place you could imagine. Everything there tried to kill you, from the moment you were born until the day you died. The plants had poisonous thorns that could punch through rock. The smallest insects could melt metal with their acid. The weather included lightning storms that could last for months, earthquakes that happened every day, and winds strong enough to pick up boulders and throw them around like toys. Over millions of years, the Vraxians had developed thick armor plating, sharp claws for digging emergency shelters, and powerful voices that could be heard over the loudest storms. They looked like monsters, but only because their planet had tried to turn them into monsters just to survive. The reality was quite different. Vraxians were gentle, thoughtful creatures who spent most of their time reading, creating art, and taking care of each other. They had to stick together because their world was so hostile. A Vraxian alone was a dead Vraxian. "Captain," said Tamora, his science officer, "I'm getting some very interesting readings from the human vessel." Tamora was smaller than most Vraxians, but she was still 7 feet tall and looked like she could wrestle a tank. In reality, she was the most careful, gentle scientist on the ship. She spent her days studying flowers and writing poetry. "What kind of readings?" Zethkar asked, walking over to her station. "Well, sir, these humans appear to have no natural defenses at all. No armor plating, no venomous spines, no electromagnetic abilities. They don't even seem to have very thick skin." Zethkar stared at the data in amazement. "That's impossible. How do they survive?" "I don't know, sir. But there's more. Look at their ship's construction." Tamora brought up detailed scans of the human vessel. It was tiny compared to Vraxian ships, but it was incredibly sophisticated. The engineering was elegant and efficient in ways that impressed even their best designers. They built this with no natural advantages at all, Tamora continued. No built-in cutting tools, no natural ability to shape metal, no electromagnetic senses to test the circuits. They did all of this with just their intelligence and some basic tools. The communications officer, a nervous Vraxian named Kethmer, looked up from his station. Captain, I think our translator is malfunctioning again. Every time we try to send a friendly greeting, it comes out sounding like a threat. This was an old problem for the Vraxians. Their voices had evolved to carry across vast distances through howling storms. To them, they sounded perfectly normal. But to every other species they'd ever met, Vraxian voices sounded aggressive and frightening. Even when they were trying to be polite. Are you sure we're sending peaceful messages? Zethkar asked. Absolutely, sir. I'm sending standard diplomatic greetings, offers of assistance, and welcomes to our space. But the universal translator keeps making it sound like we're demanding surrender. Zethkar sighed. This had happened before with other species. First contact was always difficult when you looked like a nightmare and sounded like you were always angry. Most species took one look at a Vraxian ship and ran away as fast as they could. But these humans were different. They hadn't run. They'd stayed, even though they had to be terrified. From a Vraxian perspective, this was incredibly brave. These tiny, defenseless creatures had seen something that looked like their worst enemy and decided to stand their ground. Sir, Kethmer called out excitedly, we're receiving a transmission from the humans. What does it say? Zethkar asked, moving quickly to the communication station. It's mathematical, sir. Very elegant mathematical patterns, prime numbers, universal constants, geometric sequences. It's beautiful. Zethkar studied the transmission data. The patterns were indeed beautiful, complex, and sophisticated in a way that showed real intelligence and creativity. But more than that, they were clearly peaceful. No species sent mathematical poetry as a prelude to attack. They're trying to talk to us properly, he realized. They figured out that our translator was wrong. The implications hit him all at once. These humans had been receiving what sounded like threats and demands, but instead of attacking or running away, they'd taken the time to figure out the real message. They'd seen past the scary appearance and the threatening translations to understand that the Vraxians were actually trying to be friendly. Send a response, Zethkar ordered. Mathematical patterns, just like theirs. Make it clear that we're peaceful and that we apologize for any confusion. As Kethmer worked on the message, Tamora continued studying the human vessel. Captain, I'm having trouble understanding how these creatures survived long enough to develop space travel. They're so small and fragile. Maybe that's exactly why they're so brave. Zethkar said thoughtfully, think about it. We look scary because our planet made us this way. We had no choice. But these humans chose to leave their planet and travel through space. Even though they have no natural protection at all, he paused, watching the small human ship floating fearlessly in space. In our culture, we honor those who show courage in the face of danger. These humans might be the bravest species we've ever encountered. They're doing something that even we, with all our natural armor and defenses, approach very carefully. The response from the humans came back quickly, and this time the translation was perfect, a simple, elegant message of greeting and peaceful intentions. Zethkar smiled, which looked terrifying but felt wonderful. After 3 years of careful exploration, avoiding anything that looked dangerous, they finally met someone, and against all expectations, the most fearless beings in their part of the galaxy turned out to be the smallest and most fragile looking dots. Sometimes, he thought, the universe had a sense of humor. Dr. Elena Vasquez floated in her space suit, trying not to look as nervous as she felt. The small habitat pod they built between the two ships was cramped, and she was about to meet an 8-foot-tall alien for the first time in human history. No pressure at all. The pod itself was a marvel of quick engineering. Both ships had worked together to create a neutral meeting space with air that both species could breathe and gravity that wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. It had taken days to build, But those 2 days had been filled with more excitement than the previous 3 years combined. Elena checked her equipment one more time. She had a tablet loaded with pictures of Earth, videos of human culture, and music from every continent. If this went well, she'd be the first person to ever share human civilization with aliens. If it went badly, well, she tried not to think about that. The airlock on the other side of the pod opened with a soft hiss, and Captain Zethkar entered. Elena's first thought was that the cameras hadn't done him justice. He was enormous, covered in natural armor that gleamed like polished stone, with claws that could probably slice through her space suit like paper. Her second thought was that he looked absolutely terrified. Dr. Vasquez, Zethkar said, his voice deep and rumbling even through the translator. I apologize for my appearance. I know we must look frightening to your species. Elena blinked in surprise. Here was this massive, intimidating alien warrior, and he was worried about scaring her. Captain, please don't apologize. You looked impressive, powerful. Your species clearly evolved some amazing abilities. Zethkar seemed to relax a little. At that, thank you. We often have trouble with first impressions. Our appearance tends to alarm other species, even though we mean no harm. As they began to talk, Elena realized that everything she'd expected about alien contact was wrong. Zethkar wasn't a cold, calculating warrior. He was polite, thoughtful, and genuinely curious about humanity. He asked permission before moving closer, apologized when his claws accidentally scratched the pod's surface, and spoke about his crew. With obvious affection, tell me about your home world, Elena said, pulling up her tablet. We'd love to learn about Vraxis. Zethkar's eyes lit up, literally. Elena noticed that Vraxian eyes actually glowed slightly when they were excited. Vraxis. Challenging everything that tries to eliminate you, the plants, the animals, the weather, even the ground itself. He began describing his home planet, and Elena listened in amazement. Vraxis sounded like a world designed by someone who hated the idea of life existing. Poisonous everything, constant natural disasters, and predators that made Earth's most dangerous animals look like harmless pets. How did you survive? Elena asked. By working together. A Vraxian alone dies quickly. We developed thick armor for protection, sharp claws for digging emergency shelters, and loud voices so we could find each other during storms. But mostly, we survived by taking care of each other. Elena pulled up pictures of Earth on her tablet, blue oceans, green forests, animals grazing peacefully in meadows. Zethkar stared at the images in wonder. This is your home world, he asked, his voice filled with awe. Double quotes. Yes, Earth. It's not always peaceful, but compared to what you've described, it's pretty calm. Calm? Zethkar looked at a picture of a lion. What is that creature? A lion. They're predators, but they only hunt when they're hungry, most of the time. They just sleep in the sun. Zethkar's eyes widened with what Elena was beginning to recognize as fear. That creature just walks around freely on your planet? Well, yes, there are lots of predators on Earth. Lions, tigers, bears, sharks, wolves. But they're part of the natural balance. They don't hunt humans very often. The more Elena talked about Earth, the more amazed Zethkar became. To him, Earth sounded impossibly dangerous, a world where deadly predators roamed freely, where humans had no natural armor or weapons, where people actually went swimming in oceans filled with sharks, and you live there willingly? Zethkar asked. Of course. It's our home. We've learned to coexist with the other species. Then Elena began sharing stories of human exploration and expansion across the galaxy. She showed him pictures of colonies on airless moons, research stations near dangerous stars, and mining operations in asteroid fields that would destroy any ship that made a single mistake. With each story, Zethkar looked more and more shocked. You established a colony next to an active volcano? He asked, staring at images of a mining operation. The minerals there were valuable, and we figured out how to work safely around the lava flows. And this station orbits inside the radiation field of a pulsar? The energy output was too useful to ignore. We developed better shielding. What Elena thought were normal examples of human ingenuity and adaptability. Zethkar saw as evidence. of incredible courage bordering on insanity from his perspective. Humans were casually doing things that even the most heavily armored Vraxian ships would approach with extreme caution. The conversation turned to culture and Elena's shared human. Music, art, and literature. Zethkar listened to a symphony and wept, actual tears flowing down his armored face. "This is beautiful," he said. "Your species creates such beauty despite living in constant danger." "Constant danger?" Elena laughed. "Captain, I think you have the wrong idea about Earth. It's really not that dangerous." But as she thought about it from his perspective, she began to understand. To a species that had evolved in a world where everything was trying to kill them, Earth's predators and natural hazards probably did seem terrifying, and human willingness to explore dangerous regions of space, establish colonies in hostile environments, and take risks that other species avoided. "Captain," Elena said slowly, "what do other species in the galaxy think about exploration and expansion?" "Most species stay close to their home systems. We explore carefully, with heavy defensive measures, and only visit regions that our computers confirm are safe. The idea of voluntarily going to dangerous places is," he paused, searching for words, "something we associate with the bravest heroes in our stories." Elena stared at him as the implications sank in. Humanity's rapid expansion across the galaxy, their willingness to establish colonies anywhere they could find resources, their casual attitude toward risk and exploration from the perspective of a galaxy full of cautious, defensive species. Humans weren't just brave. They were the most fearless, reckless, dangerous explorers anyone had ever encountered. "Dr. Vasquez," Zethkar said carefully, "your species may be small, but from our perspective, you are the most courageous beings we've ever met. The idea of leaving a safe home planet to explore the unknown, with no natural defenses except your intelligence, it's beyond our understanding." Elena floated in the small pod, looking at this massive, armored alien who was afraid of her species' bravery, and realized that everything humans thought they knew about their place in the galaxy was about to change completely. Admiral Chen sat in his private office, staring at reports that changed everything he thought he knew about the universe. For the past month, information had been flowing between the human ship and the Vraxian vessel, and each new piece of data painted a picture of galactic civilization that no one on Earth had ever imagined. He picked up the first report and read it again, even though he had already memorized every word. The galaxy, it turned out, was full of life. Hundreds of intelligent species had developed advanced technology, built beautiful cities, and created peaceful societies that had lasted for thousands of years. But none of them were explorers. The Vraxians were actually considered adventurous by galactic standards, and they rarely traveled more than a few light years from their home system. Most species had never left their own solar systems at all. They were content to stay home, develop their technology, and occasionally send carefully shielded robot probes to study nearby safe regions of space. Chen flipped to the next report. The few species that did explore moved slowly and cautiously, taking decades to plan a single mission to a neighboring star system. They used massive ships with multiple backup systems, traveled only to destinations their computers had confirmed were completely safe, and turned back at the first sign of any potential danger. From their perspective, the human approach to space exploration was absolutely insane. Humans had spread across dozens of star systems in just a few centuries. They established colonies on planets that other species wouldn't even visit with robot probes. They built space stations in asteroid fields, set up mining operations near unstable stars, and casually sent ships into regions of space that the galactic community marked as extremely hazardous. Avoid at all costs. Chen walked to his window and looked out at the Vraxian ship. It was massive, heavily armored, and packed with defensive systems. But it had taken the Vraxians 50 years to plan this single exploration mission, and they'd only come this far because their computers had assured them the region was relatively safe. The human ship, by comparison, was tiny and lightly protected, but it had traveled further from Earth than any Vraxian had ever traveled from their home world. And humans had done it not because they had to, but because they were curious about what was out there. Dr. Vasquez knocked on his door and entered, carrying another stack of reports. She'd been spending most of her time with the Vraxians, learning about galactic culture. And she looked both excited and slightly overwhelmed. "Admiral, you need to see this," she said, spreading out charts and data sheets on his desk. "I've been talking to their cultural experts, and the picture that's emerging is incredible." She pointed to a galactic map covered in different colored zones. The green areas are what they call safe zones, regions where multiple species have established colonies and trade routes. The yellow zones are caution areas where they send only heavily defended ships. The red zones are considered too dangerous for any civilized species to visit. Chen studied the map. "How much of the galaxy is marked as red zones?" "About 60%. And Admiral," Elena paused, looking almost embarrassed, "every single human colony we've established is in what they consider red zone territory." Chen stared at the map in amazement. From humanity's perspective, they'd been cautiously expanding into regions that seemed reasonably safe. From the galactic community's perspective, humans had been casually colonizing the most dangerous parts of known space. "There's more," Elena continued. "I asked Captain Zethkar about military conflicts, wars, territorial disputes, the kind of things we've dealt with throughout human history. Do you know what he said?" "I'm afraid to ask." "He said most species haven't had a real war in thousands of years. When disputes arise, they negotiate through careful diplomacy or simply avoid each other until the problem goes away. The idea of actually fighting over territory or resources is something they only read about in ancient history books." Chen sat down heavily in his chair. "So we're not just the most reckless explorers in the galaxy. We're also the most experienced fighters. It gets worse," Elena said, pulling out another report. "I showed them some footage of human extreme sports, mountain climbing, deep-sea diving, skydiving, that sort of thing. Things we consider fun weekend activities. How did they react?" Captain Zethkar asked if those people were prisoners being punished for crimes. He couldn't understand why anyone would voluntarily put themselves in danger for entertainment. The implications were staggering. Humanity had spent centuries imagining alien invasions, preparing for galactic wars, and worrying about hostile extraterrestrial civilizations. Instead, they discovered a galaxy full of peaceful, cautious species who were terrified of the very things humans did for fun. Elena leaned forward, her voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Admiral, there's something else. Captain Zethkar asked me privately if humans would be willing to help with some problems the galactic community has been facing." "What kind of problems?" "Dangerous problems, ancient automated defense systems that are malfunctioning and need to be shut down manually. Cosmic anomalies that need investigation but are too risky for normal exploration ships. Resource-rich regions of space that are too hazardous for most species to access." Elena pulled out a final document. They've compiled a list of locations and situations that the galactic community needs to deal with, but can't because they're too dangerous. "Admiral, it's a long list." Chen looked at the document, page after page of missions that sounded like routine operations to human space crews, but had been sitting on the galactic community's impossible tasks list for decades. They want us to be their problem solvers. He realized more than that. They want us to be their protectors. Not their conquerors or overlords, but their guardians. The courage they lack, the willingness to face danger that comes naturally to us, they see it as exactly what their civilization needs. Chen stood up and walked back to the window. The Vraxian ship looked different now, not like a potential enemy, but like a neighbor asking for help with problems they couldn't handle themselves. "Dr. Vasquez, in your professional opinion, how do you think Earth will react when they learn that we're not the small, vulnerable species we thought we were?" Elena was quiet for a moment. "I think people will be shocked. We've spent so long thinking of ourselves as newcomers to the galactic community, weak and defenseless compared to advanced alien civilizations. Learning that we're actually the most capable species in the galaxy. When it comes to handling dangerous situations, it's going to change everything." And how do you think the galactic community will react if we accept this role? I think they'll be grateful and relieved. They've been struggling with these problems for generations, afraid to risk their people on missions that might fail. To them, we're not reckless adventurers. We're heroes willing to do what no one else can do. Chen nodded slowly. Humanity had come to the stars looking for their place in the universe. They found it, but it was nothing like what anyone had expected. They weren't the junior members of a galactic civilization. They weren't the weak species that needed protection from stronger aliens. They were the galaxy's emergency responders, the ones other species called when something was too dangerous for anyone else to handle. It was a big responsibility, but then again, humans had never been afraid of big responsibilities. Ambassador Elena Vasquez stood at the edge of the largest gathering of intelligent life in known history. The Galactic Assembly Hall stretched out before her like a massive stadium, filled with thousands of beings from hundreds of different worlds. Some looked like walking trees, others resembled giant butterflies, and a few appeared to be made of living crystal that sparkled under the lights. 6 months had passed since that first meeting with Captain Zethkar, and everything had changed. Elena was no longer just a scientist on an exploration mission. She was now Earth's first ambassador to the galactic community, and today she would address the entire assembly for the first time. The journey to this moment had been incredible. After the initial contact with the Vraxians, word had spread quickly. Throughout the galaxy, other species had approached cautiously, curious about the small, brave beings who traveled fearlessly through space. Each meeting had followed the same pattern: initial fear of humanity's reckless courage, followed by amazement at their capabilities, and finally requests for help with problems that had seemed impossible to solve. Elena looked down at her speech notes, but she didn't really need them. She'd lived through everything she was about to describe. The assembly hall grew quiet as she stepped up to the speaking platform. Thousands of alien eyes focused on her, the tiny human who had somehow become one of the most important figures in galactic politics. 6 months ago, Elena began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's advanced sound system. I was a scientist looking for any sign of life in the universe. Today, I stand before the greatest gathering of life forms in known history. The journey between those two moments has taught us all something important about courage, cooperation, and finding your place in something bigger than yourself. She paused, looking out at the diverse crowd in the front rows. She could see Captain Zethkar and his crew, their massive forms somehow managing to look proud and gentle at the same time. When we first met the Vraxians, both our species made assumptions about each other. They assumed we would be terrified of their appearance. We assumed they were aggressive warriors. Both assumptions were completely wrong. A wave of gentle laughter rippled through the assembly. Many of the species present had been through similar misunderstandings during their first contacts with humans. The truth was more beautiful than either of our assumptions. The Vraxians weren't warriors. They were poets and philosophers who had been shaped by a harsh world into looking like fighters. And humans weren't the weak, helpless beings that many of you expected. We were explorers who had been shaped by curiosity into doing things that most species considered impossible. Elena activated a holographic display that showed a map of the galaxy. Green zones marked safe territories where most species lived and worked. Yellow zones showed areas of moderate danger that only the bravest alien explorers visited. Red zones marked regions considered too dangerous for civilized beings. This map shows how the galactic community had divided up known space. What we discovered was that nearly every human colony, every research station, every mining operation we'd established was in what you considered the red zones, the impossible territories. The map shifted, showing human settlements scattered throughout the red zones like bright stars in dangerous darkness. But here's what's amazing. We didn't establish those colonies because we're reckless or because we don't understand danger. We built them because we saw opportunities where others saw only risk. We saw challenges that could be overcome with the right approach. Elena clicked to the next display, showing a list of projects that humans had completed over the past 6 months. Ancient defense systems that had been malfunctioning for centuries, now safely deactivated. Dangerous cosmic anomalies that had been studied and understood. Resource-rich asteroids and hazardous regions, now being safely mined to benefit the entire galactic community. The formal agreement we're signing today establishes something new in galactic history. Humans will serve as frontier guardians, not as conquerors or rulers, but as problem solvers and protectors. We'll investigate the dangerous places, handle the risky situations, and explore the unknown regions that need exploring. She gestured toward the alien delegates. In exchange, the galactic community will share their advanced technologies, their wisdom, their art, and their friendship. This isn't about one species serving another. It's about everyone contributing their strengths to make life better for all of us. The response from the assembly was immediate and enthusiastic. Species that communicated through color changes flashed brilliant patterns of approval. Others produced musical tones that harmonized into a beautiful alien symphony. The Vraxians, Elena noticed with amusement, were trying to clap quietly so their massive hands wouldn't make too much noise. But this partnership has taught us something even more important. Elena continued as the celebration died down. For too long, humans thought of ourselves as small and insignificant in the vast universe. We worried that we were alone, that we were weak, that we had nothing special to offer. She looked directly at the human delegation from Earth, who had arrived just 2 weeks earlier and were still adjusting to their new understanding of humanity's place in the galaxy. What we've learned is that our willingness to face the unknown, our refusal to let fear stop us from exploring and growing, our determination to solve problems instead of avoiding them, these aren't weaknesses. They're gifts. They're exactly what the galaxy needed. Elena activated a final holographic display, showing the plans for the next phase of galactic expansion. Safeguarders through dangerous regions, protected by human-operated stations. Research facilities in previously unexplored areas, staffed by mixed crews of humans and aliens. Trade routes through regions that had been considered impossible to navigate. The universe is vast and full of wonders we haven't even imagined yet, but it's also full of challenges that require courage to overcome. The galactic community has the wisdom, the technology, and the patience to build amazing civilizations. Humans have the courage and determination to explore new frontiers and solve dangerous problems. She smiled, thinking about how far they'd all come since that first nervous meeting in the habitat pod. Together, we can go places and do things that none of us could accomplish alone. The galaxy's most fearsome species turned out to be its most gentle philosophers. The galaxy's smallest and most fragile species turned out to be its bravest explorers. And all of us together are going to build something incredible. The standing ovation that followed lasted for nearly 10 minutes. As Elena left the platform, she felt a gentle touch on her shoulder. Captain Zethkar was standing behind her, his massive form somehow conveying deep respect and gratitude. "Ambassador," he said quietly, "on behalf of all the species represented here today, thank you for showing us that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important discoveries come from learning that we're not what we expected to be." Elena smiled up at her enormous friend. "Thank you, Captain, for teaching us that the most fearsome-looking beings in the galaxy can also be the kindest, and for helping us realize that we're not alone in the universe. We're part of something much bigger and more wonderful than we ever imagined." As she walked through the assembly hall, surrounded by hundreds of alien species who now considered humanity their protectors and partners, Elena reflected on the incredible journey that had brought them all together. They'd come to the stars, looking for life, and found a family. They'd expected to be the weak newcomers and discovered they were the brave guardians everyone had been waiting for. The galaxy was vast and full of challenges, but it was also full of friends ready to face those challenges together. And that, Elena thought, was the most amazing discovery of all.